If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warm up, Blow! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and we've got a great podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, we're going to have one of our good friends aboard, as Matt Josephs, better known as Mid-Major Matt. He does an excellent job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He is going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be taking a look at the NIT Final Four with him. Coupled with that, we're going to be taking a look at the NCAA Tournament Final Four, and we're going to get his thoughts on some of the coaching moves that we have been seeing. We're going to start to dive in a little bit more in terms of off-season notes. Like I said, not going to really approach a transfer portal quite yet because we've got a billion names in the portal. It might be easier for me to give you a list of guys that aren't in the transfer portal rather than are in the transfer portal. So it's really hard to give you too much on that as of right now. We will be deciphering much more of that once the nets are cut down in Arizona in about a week or so. So we're certainly eyeing that up, but we're going to be looking much more at the coaching moves the next week or so in college basketball before we dive fully in to the transfer portal and what is all happening there. So we're going to be chatting about that with Matt in segment number 2. In the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on both of these NIT Final Four games as we hit some bank shots. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_D1. Keep in mind, Larzium, name does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Really didn't get in any Twitter/X questions today, and man, we've got nothing to recap because we had no college basketball on Monday, and we're just down to 6 games in total. The NIT Final Four and the NIT title, and then the actual Final Four and the actual title game. So a little bit rough, but as we are getting down to the end of the college basketball season, did want to take just like 5, maybe a few more / less minutes to parse out just why you shouldn't be forcing a whole bunch of action on things that you're unfamiliar with just because college basketball is coming to an end. For one, when we do get in season, you get 100 billion games. College basketball has the most opportunities for action humanly possible, and it is going to be a long wait from early April until November, but trust me, it is all going to be worth it when we do get to November. But on top of that, it is a case where if you're unfamiliar with some of these other sports, don't force yourself to try to become an expert in that. Like, I know that I had quite a few people asking me if I had any sort of a take with regards to the women's NCAA tournament, the women's Final Four. I just would not want to be putting out their bets on something that, frankly, I haven't watched all season long. It's not because I don't like the women's game. I mean, mad respect to Caitlin Clark getting her team to the Final Four. It was fun to watch Juju Watkins all season. Her team fell just a little bit short against UConn, but I mean, that was a great game to be able to watch, to say the least. It's really become a much better product in the last few years. I don't think anyone is going to deny that, but it's just because I'm swallowed up in so much taking a look at the men's side of things in terms of college basketball. You got 362 teams to parse through, and then those that know me know that I also do a baseball podcast called The Baseball Betting Show, which I take the same approach as I do in college basketball, looking at every single game, every single day, trying to unearth value there, and that just takes up pretty much the entirety of my time. Like, I'm an expert in baseball, I'm an expert in college basketball, I do a little bit in football. I'm not going to call it myself the Mona Lisa Vito in football, and let's call it what it is in this sphere. I feel like everyone does football because it's very easy, especially NFL. College football is a labor of love. The NFL, you get 16 games a week. A lot of the work is done for you. It's not like you have to go looking at Twitter accounts of like 200 people and trying to be like Instagram detective to try to determine if a guy for USC Upstate is going to be in/out of the fold. You don't have any of those frills. A lot of the information is very much available. It's just how you utilize the information to be able to find those winning bets. But I do think that it is very important that if you're like someone that your other sport is hockey, absolutely go out there, fire in those bets, and you are going to be noticing a expanded menu here for the Final Four. I am out here in lovely Las Vegas. So unfortunately, for those of you that are out there on the East Coast that you get to regularly put down money on college basketball player props, you're able to take a look at more of those ancillary markets. Honestly, they're not here. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that out here in Las Vegas, the big reason why I don't do any sort of player props, the reason why I don't give them out really on the show is because I have no way of betting them. Like, that's just the honest truth, because I know that I've been asked about them quite a bit. There's no way for me to be able to extract value on something that I can't bet. I just have never been able to take too much of a look at them as a result. And this week, you're going to be able to get many more options. And if you see some value on an option, and if something is really striking your fancy, absolutely do fire in on it. If you see an edge, always bet it. If you feel good about it, you want to be plopping down your money and putting your money where your mouth is. If you don't have too much assurance in it and you're just like, well, I need action, that's not an approach that you want to take. Don't force up action on like player props that you typically wouldn't. Don't force yourself to dive into a market or heck, even a different sport that you wouldn't just because you have a little bit less action. I think that that's the biggest thing that you can do as a sports bettor. Just learn to bet what you know, and what you don't know, you don't know. And that's perfectly okay, because I think that so many people in this day and age, they try to be the master of everything. And I'm sure that you all have these people in your life where they know nothing about stocks and they pretend to be a stock market wizard because they put like money down and in one day it went up by like 5% and all of a sudden they're the Mona Lisa Vito of it. And those are the people who are just so annoying. I think that we can all agree, hopefully this is giving you a little bit of a fence session with regards to this podcast, but I do think that it is very important to just know what you know, don't know what you don't know, and recognize who you are as a sports bettor and not force up action this time of year. Like I said, if there is something that you typically don't find on the betting market and you're like, hey, I think that this number is way off, absolutely bet it. If you don't see that, then don't. So that's the best advice I can give you. And if I do see any sort of an ancillary market that I'm going to be firing on, I will give it out on this podcast. If I don't, I will not. So that is my vow to you, and I vow to keep this podcast going every single day as well, much like we've done in the last few off seasons. When the Nets are cut down in Arizona next week, I'll keep this rolling, looking at the transfer portal, looking at these coaching moves, doing a preview for every single conference during the offseason. So you guys are going to get Coast to Coast Hoops all 366 days this year due to the leap year, and you're going to have great chats all throughout the offseason as well. And we're going to have a great chat next with Mid-Major Matt, better known as Matt Josephs. He does great work over at FTM Bets, does a great job on the show Border to Border for ESPN Richmond as well. Going to be talking about the NIT Final Four, regular Final Four, these coaching moves, and so much more with them next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now a part of the VC Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as Matt Josephs. You know him better as Mid-Major Matt. He does such a great job taking a look at this great game that we all know love of college basketball. For those that know me, you know that I also love baseball. Matt, he does a tremendous job on that front as well, as I know that he's got a lot of player props going, and he's going to be certainly on my baseball betting podcast sooner rather than later as well. You're able to catch him on Twitter/X at Mid-Major Matt all together. And Matt, always great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Always a great time, and so sad we are down to just a couple of games left in the college basketball season.
Yep, we are down to only 6 games in total. The 2 NIT Final Four games and then that title game, then the 2 regular Final Four games and that title. I'm sure that you'll be talking about that out there in ESPN Richmond, Border to Border. You do great work over at FTM Bets, all that good stuff. So I know that you've got a lot to be able to dissect with regards to those games along with baseball. But how do you take a look at the Final Four that we've got in the NCAA tournament as 2 teams I felt like were very expected? Purdue, UConn, these are teams that many of us expected to be here. Alabama, a little bit of a surprise. And then with NC State, if you had them in your Final Four, I salute you, because I certainly did not.
Yeah, and if you had NC State, chances are you went there. But even half of, even most of the NC State fans didn't necessarily believe that their team was going to be there. It's an interesting Final Four in terms of they're probably going to be bad games. Unfortunately, you look at the spreads with it being 11.5 for the UConn game and 9 and 8.5 for the Purdue game, and you probably don't expect them to be close. They'll be close early on, obviously, but I just think that Alabama doesn't play enough defense to keep up with UConn, and I think unfortunately DJ Byrne will get somewhat neutralized by Zach Edey. But I think we have some good good storylines, and it's still a chance to enjoy the game we love of college basketball.
Yep, absolutely. And it has been just so much fun to be able to take a look at these games, take a look at the run in general for NC State. And just how do you handicap this NC State team? Because they have played so much different these last 10 games than they had for the entirety of the season. And that is one of the most difficult things for me when it comes to handicapping, not just college basketball, but any sport, taking a look at recent form versus the overall season numbers. Because if you look at the overall season numbers, Purdue, as we're recording this, is a 9 to 9.5 point favorite. I think that they're the very obvious play. But if you look at recent form, this has been an NC State team that has been completely different. Granted, they've had some bounces go their way. No fans or buts about it. But I do think that it's very hard to decide, all right, are we going to go with the NC State that we've seen the last few weeks or what we've seen in terms of the entire body of work?
And it's interesting because this is the same NC State team that was losing at halftime to Louisville in the first round of the ACC tournament, and everybody's like, oh, boy.
They needed the bank three just to knock off Virginia.
Exactly, yeah, and Kevin Keats wasn't going to have his job much longer, and then all of a sudden, look where they are. Now he's got a contract extension. And I think it's rather interesting when you talk about, this Purdue team, and I think you kind of have to discuss how they officiate Zach Edey. Respect for what Zach Edey does. He is a tremendous college basketball player, and he deserves an advantage for being a taller player and a wider player than a lot of the players he plays against. But I think he is also a problem in terms of officiating because they don't like to allow contact on him, but a lot of times he gets rebounds and he leads with his elbow. And so that makes things rather difficult for Zach. And when you've got an NC State team that, they rely heavily on DJ Burns, I'm guessing Diarra will start out on Zach Edey, but he might get in some foul trouble. Ben Middlebrooks is going to not be able to do very much against Zach. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the officiating goes in this game and how quickly Diarra gets his first foul, his second foul. Do they go to Middlebrooks? Do they go to DJ Burns? DJ Burns can't afford to get that second foul in the first half. Like, NC State has to preserve him as much as possible, even if they have to move him off of Zach Edey and have him be at a matchup disadvantage elsewhere.
Absolutely, and I do think that is going to be a very, very difficult matchup for this NC State team, and I think that the three-point shooting variance that has been so favorable for them, I do think that moving forward, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to be able to bank on teams shooting like 20% from three-point range, as Matt Josephs, better known as Mid-Major Matt, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And in terms of the other matchup that we've got in the Final Four, I forget about Alabama. Can any of these four teams even touch UConn at this point? Because I've looked at this team and I've thought, you know what, maybe there's a little bit of a weak point with regards like their three-point shooting defense or something like that. But at this point, they have been a big giant bulldozer that has just rammed through everyone the last few weeks.
Well, the only thing I can say about this game is that I'm guessing Alabama's going to score more than 52 points, which is what they've held the opponents to. I would like to think so, yes. Of course, we thought that Illinois would score more than 52 points, and they unfortunately didn't. The one difference that I think is going to happen in this game, and this is why the other teams have lost to Alabama, this is why North Carolina lost, was everybody tried to run with Alabama. You can't do that, and I don't think Danny Hurley's team is going to run unless they have tremendous opportunities for layups or things like that. It's not to say that UConn couldn't run, but I just don't think they want to get into a game that's very back and forth. You look at the possession numbers that Alabama has had so far in this tournament, they're 71, 72, 71, 83. UConn hasn't played a game like that since they beat Xavier 99-56 back at home when they had 72 possessions on January 28th. So UConn is just not going to let Alabama run, and I think that's going to be the issue for the Crimson Tide because they're so much better when they're out in the open.
And how much do you think that it's a disadvantage to Alabama that they're playing this game in a converted football stadium? Because when you've got a three-happy team like Alabama, I think that they're the teams that they suffer the most when we do get in these big, giant, like football-like stadiums, just anything in general where you've got a non-natural basketball court out there, because the first thing that typically goes, in my opinion, is the jump shooting, and Alabama is one of the teams in college basketball that attempts the most threes on a per field goal attempt basis in the country.
Yeah, it's why I lean to the under. It's not an easy under to take. Taking an under in an Alabama game is very bad for your health. But, I feel like Alabama is going to struggle. We've seen teams come out and surprise us from time to time in these football stadiums and shoot pretty well. So it's not like that there's a definite chance that Alabama is going to be terrible. They could shoot well, but I think combine that with UConn's defense, and I think Alabama is going to struggle. The problem is with a 161.5 in Alabama is that if for some reason their offense works a little bit, this thing will go over, because I do expect UConn UConn that probably get to approach 90, maybe an 82, an 85. And then if you see an 85, then you're basically asking for a 76 or so from Alabama. I don't think they're going to get to 76. So I would lean to the under in this game for one of the reasons that you just talked about, the sight lines, but also UConn's defense.
Yeah, absolutely. This UConn defense has just been a complete and utter menace, a top 10 team in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And when you're Illinois going up against Donovan Clingan, probably want to take a few shots that aren't being contested by Donovan Clingan, as they were held to 0-19 when he contested those shots in the Elite Eight. As joining me on the show, we've got Matt Josephs, better known as Mid Major Matt, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and we're recording this out of Tuesday's NIT Final Four as well. And I know you've been a man that has been all aboard the Indiana State Sycamores. The profile picture right now on Twitter/X is that of one of our good friends, Robbie Avila. And just how do you take a look at Indiana State as we record this, being a 2.5-point favorite against Utah, playing in their home state of Indiana?
I think that's going to be a huge help, is that there's going to be a lot of fans for Indiana State because Holman has been a tremendous place for them to play so far. It's pretty funny, and I expect that, 24 hours after they win or lose this thing, they're going to probably end up losing Josh Schertz. Although, if I'm Coach Schertz, I look at this roster and I'm like, okay, Avila's a sophomore. Maybe he comes back. Conwell's a sophomore. Swope's a junior. Julian Larry's a junior. Jason Kent's a junior. Maybe there's a chance that this roster stays together and they try and pull a Florida Atlantic type of situation where they all come back and they try and, improve on their situation next year. When you look at Utah's just not the same team away from home. They've only won 2 games. Now, granted, they were 2 pretty good games. One was back in November, they won at St. Mary's, and then in February, they won at UCLA. But other than that, they're just a completely different team on the road. And so you have this situation where their defense does not force any turnovers. They're 326 in turnover percentage on defense, and they're a bad free throw shooting team, which makes me want to go away from them, especially in this situation. The home crowd will be in Indiana State's favor, and Indiana State is very motivated to get to this championship game. So I already have a piece of Indiana State's money line here. I think they win this game. I'm surprised the number is as short as it is. I expect it to go up as we get closer to tip-off here, but I think the Sycamores get the victory here.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I do think the fact that they were a team that got snubbed from the NCAA tournament, I think that they want to stick it to the committee being like, yeah, you took Virginia instead of us. Look at what we were able to do. And I feel like that's been sort of the same motivation for Seton Hall, who's a 4-point favorite. And I take a look at the Seton Hall bunch, and I do think that they match up very well with this Georgia team. Certainly it's a Seton Hall team that sometimes leaves a little bit of something to be desired in terms of perimeter shooting. But I look at Seton Hall versus Georgia, and once again, on a relatively tight line, I do lean to the favorite here.
Yeah, I do too. I agree. The one thing that's interesting is Georgia's path has been very tough. You play a Xavier team at home, and then you travel to Wake Forest. We know how potent Wake Forest is. Clearly, they were not as focused for this game. Then they went to Ohio State, a team that had every reason to be motivated because Jake Diebler became the full-time coach here. And so, I'm very impressed with what Georgia had to do to get here, whereas Seton Hall was home the whole time, and they got St. Joe, and they got North Texas, and they got UNLV traveling cross-country. So I feel like things have been a little bit easier, but you also look at a Seton Hall team that's very senior-laden. There's a ton of guys who are basically, and obviously the COVID years come into play and things like that, but there's a lot of guys who are playing their last game as members of Seton Hall, and I think that's an ultimate sort of situation where you get the ultimate motivation. And Shaheen Holloway, another guy who may or may not get a job 24 hours after this thing is over. So I do like Seton Hall. I think our championship game is going to be Indiana State and Seton Hall. I do think that Indiana State's going to win this thing, and I'm not just saying that because I have a future on them, but I do think this kind of lines up well for Seton Hall and Indiana State.
Yep, I agree with you. If this were played out there at the Garden, I might lean a little bit more to Seton Hall, but out there in the great state of Indiana, I do think that Indiana State, they do have themselves a nice edge there. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that with Shaheen Holloway, him perhaps being in the running for a few of these jobs. And the coaching search is very hot and heavy right now in college basketball, thus having literally 6 games remaining in the rest of the college basketball season. Now, we are starting to take a look at the offseason, and best of luck to anyone trying to keep up with the transfer portal right now, because I think it might be easier to make a list of guys that are not in the transfer portal rather than guys that are. But that said, in terms of the coaching moves that we've already seen, because we have seen quite a few, are there any that really stand out to you, whether it be a move that you really like, or a move that maybe caused you to scratch your head a little bit?
Well, I mean, I'll stay in my neck of the woods in Virginia. I like the hiring of Preston Spradlin as the new head coach at James Madison. It's the final move that Jeff Bourne, the AD there, is doing, because Jeff Bourne was supposed to retire, and they decided that he was going to be there to go and get another head coach there. And I really like what Preston Spradlin did at Morehead State. Now, the problem is he's got essentially no roster because there were a ton of seniors, and Xavier Brown and Jalen Carey and Raekwon Horton and pretty much everybody else who had eligibility and played in the NCAA tournament has gone into the portal. Now, maybe they'll be able to come back. I would love to see a Xavier Brown come back or a Jalen Carey come back, because as of we doing this, I don't think any of them have found any other jobs. So I think it's a really good hire for Preston Spradlin. I'm a huge fan of Mark Byington. I mean, he's got a lot of work to do to bring Vanderbilt back, but we saw what he did at James Madison. We saw what he did at Georgia Southern. Granted, it's a huge step up, and Vanderbilt doesn't have the facilities everybody else does in the SEC, but if you saw what he did at James Madison the couple years he was there, I think eventually Mark Byington will do some good things at Vanderbilt.
And I think that's very fair to say as well. The reason why a lot of those Vanderbilt coaches flamed out as well, it just felt like every single year, regardless of who the coach was, Vanderbilt seemed to get 100 billion injuries. So hopefully Mark Byington gets a little bit of a better fate there, because just year in and year out, it has been ridiculous what we've seen on that front. And we have seen a few interesting hires out west as well. I look at the now former Pac-12 schools, and Stanford hiring on Kyle Smith. Washington, they're able to bring in Danny Sprinkle, and it was about dang time that they made moves. I was very much wondering why they were waiting so long, but even though it should have probably been done a year or two early, I felt like both of those schools did a really good job in terms of getting coaches that I think are going to be able to have success at their new stomping grounds.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting as we kind of do this, and it looks like Andy Enfield is going from USC to SMU, and SMU basically saying, all right, Rob Lanier was nice for the AAC, but now that we're heading to the ACC, we need to have a more legit coach. And so I think Andy Enfield, it seemed like towards the end at USC, it wasn't working out as well. So we'll see what he does in SMU, but we know the kind of money he could have at SMU with all the NIL that's out there and the Texas money that is kind of out there for SMU people. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And yeah, the ones you mentioned, certainly Kyle Smith is a guy who's had some success where he's been, and I think he's going to continue that. He's a guy who seems to enjoy being on the West Coast schools. So why not just stay out there and kind of be familiar? It's nice to stay in your footprint. And if you have coaching relationships and things like that, by staying out west, you kind of, stay in that footprint. We've seen guys go from the west to the east, and it hasn't worked out as well. I'll throw a college football example at you. When Bronco Mendenhall went from BYU to Virginia, it took him some time to get some relationships with the Virginia coaches. It took him some time to get some relationships with the East Coast coaches. So if you like the West Coast, staying out west is certainly something you could consider.
Yep, I think that's so important to do. And we have seen some guys be able to go from east to west and be able to have some success. We take a look at Ryan Odom. He went from UMBC to Utah State, back over to VCU. He's had success at all three stops thus far, so you give some credit where credit is due. But to your point, when you do travel from one time zone to another, that does cause things to be a little bit more difficult, and no doubt about it, we're going to be seeing a lot of fireworks this offseason after what has been a tremendous season in general here in college basketball. Matt, you do a great job of covering that, but on top of that, I was alluding to it a little bit before as well. You do an amazing job on the baseball front. I know you're tirelessly taking a look at college football as well, as that's another transfer portal that is very, very hard to decipher too. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, a lot of spring college football going on. It's never too early, as you do with college basketball, to kind of just jot down some notes, see who's leading in certain quarterback races and things like that. And then, of course, as you said, baseball season will dominate our lives for the next 200 plus days, it feels like, with all the sorts of, pitching props for me. The K props are certainly important. I like to take a look at that in the first fives and the first threes and things like that. My days of handicapping 9-inning games for the most part have been kind of gone. And certainly you get a lot of questions from people with regards to props and stuff like that. And I know you don't do it, so they could certainly come to me at Mid-Major Matt. You can find my work on FTN Bets, and we all have the same goal. We all want to beat the books, and that's how we're going to do it.
Absolutely, and Matt does an incredible job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins this show, he lends such good insights, and did so once again today. So big thanks to Matt for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, we've got the NIT Final Four in our lives. I'll give you guys picks and analysis on both of those games as we hit some bank shots. back to Lovey Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to be joined by our friend Matt Josephs, aka Mid-Major Matt, doing a tremendous job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins the show, I feel like we get just a little bit smarter. So big thanks to him for joining me in last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday, this NIT Final Four Tuesday, as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at GN_41. Very easy in terms of time order. Utah-Indiana State is up first. That's the early game. And then Georgia versus Seton. That's up second. Both of these games going to be taking place out there in the lovely state of Indiana from Hinkle Fieldhouse. So let's dive in on 661, 662. And this is also my write-up pick, as we've got Indiana State playing against Utah, with Indiana State the 3 to 3.5 point favorite. Most of the threes are starting to go by the wayside as I do this. Total on this game is 163.5. And whether you've got a 3 to a 3.5, my write-up here, it is going to be on Indiana State. I'd be willing to lay up to 4 with the Sycamores. You've got a Indiana State team that is just so good offensively. Number 7 in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and when they're in a road/neutral court setting, it really doesn't fall off too much. They're still number 8 in the country in that regard, and they go up against a Utah team that they just are not the same team when they're away from home rather than when they are at home. They're overall about 90th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they're giving up 17.5 points more per 100 possessions when away from home rather than at home, and their offense suffers by about 11 points fewer scored per 100 possessions when they're away from home rather than at home. And they have to go up against an Indiana State team that has a trio of guys: Ryan Conwell, Isaac Swope, Robbie Avila, who are all giving you at least 15.5 points per contest. Avila, along with Ryan Conwell, are combining for about 12 rebounds per game, and Indiana State actually has a rebounding advantage in this game. 51st in terms of overall rebound rate. Utah is more around 80th, and Utah is just getting cooked from the three-point line, allowing opponents to shoot 36.5% from three-point range in a road/neutral court setting. Meanwhile, Indiana State, away from home, they are 4th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Offense at 38.8% in the Utah three-point shooting defense away from home, by the way. That is clocking in 293rd in all of college basketball. And Utah, just in general, has had a rough time away from home. In games played in a road/neutral court setting, they're 5-12 straight up now. Brandon Carlson is actually going to do a solid job, in my opinion, on Avila. He's able to give you 17 points per contest. He's a 7-footer that gives you 6.5 boards, shoots 37.5% from three-point range. And this is a good outside shooting team for Utah. Out of their top 5 scorers, all but one of them shooting at least 35.5% from three-point range. That includes Davion Smith, who's been able to give you triple-doubles throughout the NIT, 12.5 points, 6.5 boards, 7.5 assists. He has been great, but that said, this is also a Utah team that if they're in a nip-and-tuck game, they're outside the top 330 in terms of free throw shooting percentage, shooting 64.9%. Indiana State, they're number 2 in the country in terms of free throw shooting percentage, which makes a tight line like this very difficult to take with Utah. You've got Kiba Kita, who's able to give you about 5.5 or so rebounds per game, but for Indiana State, they're the better defensive team in this spot. Indiana State also only has to travel about 80 miles away from campus to be able to get to this game. Utah has to travel multiple time zones. There's just a lot working against Utah in this spot, so my write-up here is going to be on Indiana State, willing to lay up to 4, and did set my total 158.5. I do think that the Utah State defense will struggle a little bit, but with unfamiliar surroundings and Utah's offense also being not as great when they're away from home, I do think that we are going to be able to get it under in this spot, and Indiana State to be able to get the job done. Indiana State spread is my write-up pick, and we wrap things up with 663, 664. It is Georgia facing off against Seton. Seton, a 4 to 4.5 point favorite. Total on this game between 144.5 and 145.5. Did set my total at a 145. Personally, I would rather have the 145.5 under rather than the 144.5 over. Got a Seton team that has been relatively mid-tempo this year, and for Georgia, they are a team that they look to crank up the tempo, top 125 in terms of total possessions per game. They have been outside the top 150 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but this Georgia team, they have been rounding into form a little bit more in terms of their defense, and for Georgia, it's not like you necessarily have a bunch of bona fide scorers on this team. Jabri Abdul-Rahim, along with Noah Thomason, these two guys have been able to combine combined for 25 points. They've been able to get quite a bit out of Blue Kane as well. He's someone that comes in off the bench, 7.5 points from three-point range. He's been one of their better shooters at about 35% for a Georgia team that, as a whole, they shoot about 33.5% from the outside. They do a relatively solid job, not turning the ball over a ton, about 11.5 turnovers per contest, but the big thing for this Georgia team is that they are going to get absolutely clocked on the glass. Russell Chewa, true 7-footer, he's able to give you about 7 or so rebounds per game, but Seton Hall, one of the best rebounding teams in all of college basketball. Seton Hall, 30th in the country in terms of their overall rebound rate. Jaden Bediako has come in and has done a very solid job of being able to hit the glass for the team, 7 rebounds per game, but the game of Kadari Richmond is one that I just don't think that anyone on this Georgia team is going to be able to stay in front of. Kadari Richmond does it all for the team. He's been able to supply the team with about 15.5 points, throws in there 5 assists, 6+ rebounds per game, and then you've got Trey Davis, Elamir Dawes, two very good ancillary scorers, giving you about 14.5 points per contest apiece. Elamir Dawes is shooting about 38% from 3, and Seton Hall, they're only shooting about 32.5%, 33% from 3-point range overall for the season, and they're 12.8 turnovers per game. It's a little bit costly, but they do go up against a Georgia team that just in general has not been able to force a lot of turnovers this season, and I do think that for Seton Hall, they're going to be able to do an okay job with regards to their defense. They are a team that has been struggling when playing away from home. They're scoring about 13 points less per 100 possessions in games played away from home rather than at home, and they're giving up nearly 13 points more per 100 possessions in games played away from home rather than at home, but that leaky defense of Georgia, just overall 165th in the country. That's a little bit of an issue. And this is a Georgia team that they just do overall struggle with their shot. They are shooting about 35.5% from 3-point range in games played away from home, but they're a team that they've just been having a little bit of choppy offense in general. RJ Melendez, I just don't know what he does really well. He gives you about 9.5 points, 4 boards, a little bit of an awkward guy out there on the court. So I do think that Seton Hall, they've got a lot to play for. This bunch is trying to stick it to the committee that they should have been in the NCAA tournament, and I do think that they're going to send a message here, willing to lay up to 4.5 with Seton Hall, and did set my total 145, so you're at the 145.5 going under to go along Seton Hall, and that'll wrap things up for the Tuesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Mid-Major Matt, aka Matt Josephs, for joining me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, which means I'm coming at you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.